Welcome to Painting Flowers Fresh and Free. We're going to loosen up today. Let's start working on this background. I'm going to be negative painting around the flower shape. Doesn't matter what flower shape you choose to do, but we're going to negative paint around it. And then making sure I have nice wet puddles of paint, I'm going to blow the paint out with a straw. And then I'm going to soften it with a clean, damp brush, just with a little bit of water. You can start throwing in, splattering, adding more colors. You can use any colors you choose. Have a good time. Be playful. You're going to move around the shape of the flower. So just negative painting around each petal, building up a nice juicy puddle of color. Turn your paper. Make it comfortable for you, especially when blowing it out. Adding a little additional color. And I blow that color out and it mixes and it blends beautifully. Be sure to clean up your edges. This piece of paper is taped down, so I'm wiping up any paint that's accumulated along the edge. I don't want that extra paint to flow back into my painting as I'm continuing to work. At any point while the area of paint is still wet, you can add different colors, more colors. My goal is that I should have lively pigment. I love the soft blending of the colors as I blow the paint out. If you've never tried this technique, it's a lot of fun. I have another video here on YouTube, is all about blowing paint and creating flowers. So different technique than this, or I should say a different painting than this. The technique is very similar with blowing the paint out, but we're going to create flowers from the marks we make once we've blown the paint out. It's a fun video. If you're interested, check it out here on YouTube. Here I've just negative painted around the stem of the flower. I don't mind if when I blow the paint, it overlaps some of the other shapes, like the stem or the leaves, because the value is going to be light enough that I can negative paint and create those shapes later on in the painting. The value looks dark when I put it down, but you'll notice as soon as I start blowing the paint out, you'll notice that in that movement, the value is lightening because the paint is dispersing into a larger area. I don't want to leave all those hard edges. So it's really simple at this point. I just go in with some clean water on a clean brush. I can leave as many marks as I want, and I can disperse or hide the marks just by water painting, just by adding water right over them. Anytime you want, splatter more paint in, add more colors. It's your painting. Have a lot of fun doing it. Enjoy this process. Negative painting is so important to watercolorists because we need to save the white of the paper. We don't use white paint to paint with because it makes our colors appear chalky and less transparent. And if you're like me and you love the transparency of watercolor, that's where you don't want to go into a painting with white paint. I'm not saying you can't touch up a little bit of whites here and there that you might have not been able to save. That's different, but I don't like my paint mixed with the white pigments at all. I decided to splatter a little bit of blue in. When you're working on your art, you make the decisions. Do you want to see additional colors? You could practice with just two colors. Here I felt I wanted to see a little bit of blue built into this. I always feel when I add a little bit of blue, it starts to give the feeling of the sky. Now I'm using a little spray bottle of water and I'm softening some of the edges. I'm not even touching it with my brush. Now it's time to actually paint the flower itself. So we're going to first start with the center of the flower. I have mixed a dark. I used some umber and some bright violet. Bright violet's a Holbein color. It's a nice, bright, clean violet color. You can use any purple. And I've mixed a dark and I'm applying it to the circle center area. Does not have to be a perfect circle. I'm making the area on the outside of the circle the darkest, and then I'm starting to build on the inside of the circle. I'm using a little bit of cadmium yellow orange, I've added some of the bright violet in there. I'm just mixing the colors, but I'm making sure the center of the circle remains the brightest. Here I just added a little bit of quinacridone gold. I'm allowing that to dry a little bit because now I'm going to start playing with the petals, and I don't want the entire center to bleed out if I touch it with a wet brush. I don't mind if a little bit of it bleeds out. I will be creating the petals, and the darkest area of the petals will be closest to the center of the flower. So I don't mind a little bit bleeding out, but I didn't want the whole thing to just rush out. And you could see there I'm getting a more of a controlled bleeding of that center. Now I'm just using some cerulean yellow in a very, very light value. I'm going to be negative painting the petals. I don't want to start with a very dark color. Adding a little bit of a transparent orange. I usually use a Schmincke color. I'm adding a little bit of it closest to the center. The petals are going to be deeper as they're attached to the center, and they have a much lighter, brighter feel because more light's hitting them towards the edge of the petals. Just placing it where I feel I would add a little bit of more depth or darkness. Now the paper's completely dry, and I'm going and I'm negative painting around the individual petals. Not all of them, but some of them are going to remain as my surface petals. I'm using the cerulean yellow. I just changed the value, so it's a little bit of a darker value. I am painting around some of the petals, and then I'm softening that edge with just a clean brush of water. So some of them remain lighter, and some of them are pushed back into a darker value. And that's how I start creating the depth in the different petals. Again, just creating more depth. Being careful now with a clean brush, barely any water. I'm now softening the edges. That has to dry, so now I'm just coming down, and I'm going to start to negative paint some of the petal shapes. Adding some of the blue. I'm outlining, not completely the petal, but I'm outlining the petal, and I'm adding some blue, and then I'm taking a clean brush, and I'm removing the back edge of that blue. Not the blue up against the leaf, but you see the back edge of the blue. I don't want that hard edge except on the side of the leaf. If you ever put color down, you feel it's a little dark, just add some water. Again, softening that edge. Paper's wet, I can always add a little bit of pigment and brighten it up if I choose. I left some space for a soft edge. I don't want that entirely outlined in a really hard edge. just reinforcing the shape of the stem. This is going to be the stem to a leaf. Again, I'm using soft and hard edges. I don't want everything completely closed in. I want to give a variety of edges, which I feel just make it more interesting. Here I'm using my paintbrush as if it's a pencil. I'm just outlining where I want to see the next leaf shape. And then I start the negative painting. So I'm painting around the leaf with a variety of colors, and the leaf appears. That's all negative painting is, painting around an object and the object appears. I want that edge soft, so I'm just adding a little bit of water. I feel I have enough hard edges to capture the shape of the leaf, and it doesn't have to be hard edged completely around the leaf. Later, we'll be doing negative painting inside that leaf to show some of the veins and marks. Going back in with some more of the Cerulean yellow in a darker value, and bringing those leaves a little more to life now. Bringing in some Aussie red gold. This is a Daniel Smith color. Clean brush with just water. I'm keeping the lightness towards the edge of the petals where they'd be in more sunlight. And just by using change of value, I'm pushing and pulling petals, so some look like they're forward and some look like they're back. I'm grabbing that edge, and I'm going to push those petals back slightly and bring that center petal forward. You see how that petal now stands out? It steps forward because I darkened behind it. And I'm adding a little bit of color to that petal. I'm coming down to the stem. Now this area is all dry because I moved up into the face of the flower, and now I can come back into this area. Again, I'm reinforcing, I'm adding more colors, using my blue to reinforce the shape of the stem both coming from the flower and leading up to the petal. I'm using my Silver Black Velvet brushes. They really are my favorite brushes. I like the way they come to a nice point because they're partially synthetic hairs, yet they hold a lot of pigment because they are partially animal hair, squirrel hair. Reinforcing some of the colors in my painting. And now I'm going back to the other petal and I'm bringing out more of that edge. I always start with a very light value. It's easy to go darker. But if I had started this with a very dark outline and I didn't really care for something, it's harder to change it at that point. So I always start with a light value when I'm negative painting. Many times people ask me, how do you paint with so many different colors and you don't make it look muddy? Well, if you notice, I'm picking up individual colors, I'm putting them down, but I'm not fussing them into my painting. When I put the colors down, I usually let them mingle themselves. I don't force them to mingle or mush them together. Here I'm coming back in with some of the Aussie Red Gold. That's a Daniel Smith color. And I'm again reinforcing some of those edges, and I'm making sure that those petals are filled with some pretty colors, but feel like they're sitting on top of each other. And that's what negative painting allows me to do. Only removing the edge that's away from the petal I'm trying to lift. So when I put that mark down, I want that petal that I'm painting on to recede. So that's why I'm pulling the color into that petal. And you could see the petal to the left of it really lifts off the paper. When I add this little bit of a mark, I'm not going to pull it back into the petal that I just lifted. I'm going to pull it to the petal that's between those two petals. And again, you see how it starts to give more depth. And the same technique is used whether I'm painting tulips or I'm painting daffodils or sunflowers. It's the same technique of negative painting that I use to push and pull my petals forward and back. Coming back into the center. I don't want a perfect circle. I want it to look like those petals are coming out of that center. So I'm just kind of ruffling up the edge of the center and letting it bleed or just come into the petals a little bit more. Keeping the darkness on the outer edge of that center. If I filled the whole thing in dark, it would look very flat, and I don't want it to look flat. I want it to look like it's a mound. It has a roundness to it. And by doing that, I'm going to keep the darkest on the edges and the lightness in the center. Building my darks. And now I'm adding a little bit of bright rose, a Holbein color, to keep that center nice and bright. Don't overwork those centers. Drop your colors, let them mingle, and move out. Let it dry and see yours and watch your results. I also try to leave a couple little white specks in there. I just like that it looks like there might be a little sun hitting on it. It just leaves me a little bit of brightness. Let's start the negative painting inside of the leaves to start showing off the veins. This is a really simple technique to do. The veins of the leaf will be lighter than the leaf itself. And I'm negative painting to bring out those light marks, those light shapes inside the leaves. So I'm painting a darker value with using a green, and then the actual veins themselves will be the color, that pinkish color of the leaf. I'll use a clean brush with water. Now start softening those edges. I have a great variety of videos on negative painting. So explore them. Go to my channel and look up some of the different uses of negative painting, between painting trees and flowers and leaves. You'll find a whole variety. There's also plenty of exercises on just painting a variety of shapes using negative painting techniques. The value in watching those and doing the exercises is they're very simple ways for you to start learning negative painting. I try to start with very simple shapes like circles, and we work on leaves, and we work on trees, and we work on stars and squares and all different shapes that you can practice to start to get your mind to see those negative shapes. I love negative painting, and that's why I do so much of it and so many videos on it. But you can see here how simple. I start to put down some paint, and then you start to see those little shapes appear. To make them more interesting, I try not to make them where they look like they're just one solid line. I break them up. Some are closer together, some are further apart. Um, some are a little thicker, some are thinner. Some start from the center vein and move out. Some will kind of just hug the edge a little more of the leaf. So I like the variety that I can add to my paintings. But remember, the paper must be dry. Otherwise, you can't get a hard edge. It'll just bleed out. And we need a little bit of a hard edge to show that little bit of a shape in there. So I'm not just creating the veins that run from the center to the outer edge of the leaf. I'm also creating the center vein that runs from the top to the bottom of the leaf as I do this. Always I have that clean brush in my hand with just water. Many times you'll see me painting with two brushes in my hand. One has paint and one is just clean water. That's when I'm doing my negative painting. I always like that extra brush right there so I can immediately start changing edges. Adding a little bit of color to the stem of the flower. Here I'm using some pink. I like a variety of color. I'm not afraid to make pink leaves and pink stems. Here I'm adding a little bit of the green over it, which makes it a little bit of a grayish color. Turn your paper. Make it easy for you to paint. Again, the negative shapes. To make it easy for yourself, you can pencil all these marks in and then just paint the areas around the stems. Paint the areas around the veins. You see how that's appearing? Both the center vein is appearing and the little veins that are shooting off that center are appearing. But please make it easy for yourself. Don't frustrate yourself. If you need to pencil it out first, do that. Eventually, if you negative paint a lot, you just start to see the marks you need to make to create the negative space. The other leaf, I started with the green paint and added pink to it. And here I started with the pink, and I'm going to add a little green to it. There's my little green going in. Here I felt I didn't like the edge, the way the paint was falling on the edge, and I just have some clean water and I'm just lifting a little bit of that out. It was a little too outlined looking. So it was very simple with a little bit of water. I didn't pick up a scrubber brush. I'm just still using my soft brush. And I like that it doesn't have such an outlined look to it, that specific little stems of the leaf. Here I've got the Aussie Red Gold back on my brush. And I'm trying to add a little more depth where those petals would connect with the center of the flower. I don't need that depth on the edge. The edge are in sunlight. Turn your paper again. Make it easy for yourself when you're going to paint. Now I decided I want to see a little more vibrancy in the colors in the background. So all I'm doing is going over them with the same colors I used in the beginning when I was blowing them out. So this is my peacock blue, a Holbein color, just reinforcing it, brightening it up. And remember, when I'm coming in now, I can go around those petals and I can define the shapes a little bit more if I choose. Clean water, and I'm going to soften the edge as I pull that color down. And I'll continue to do that with the blues and the pinks and even the yellows, and just brighten up that whole area. This to me is so relaxing. I don't want to lose that organic shape that was created when I blew out the paint, because it looks like something is happening in the background. So I'm going over just carefully and redefining the colors, redefining the edges. Where there's blue, I'm adding blue. Where there's pink, I'm going to add pink. And where there's yellow, I'm going to add yellow. I like the colors. I don't want to change them. I just want them a little bit to have a little more, a darker value, a little brighter. If you're happy with your background, you do not have to touch it again. I'm not adding new marks. I'm just reinforcing the marks that are there. And you can see it just brings more color up to the top of my painting. Again, I can come in here and just define those petal shapes a little bit more. When I lift the paper, it's because I want the paint to flow. I can bring out that stem by changing the value of the paint around it. If I felt it was an area was getting a little bit lost in the background, I'm just going to go in and reinforce it by changing the value. Many times people say to me, like, why did you leave those little white spots in the middle under that flower? And I go, they were created in my original wash. And I like that they brought light through. That you could see it wasn't just a solid, heavy background. How simple it is to just brighten that pink up. I am doing this over dry paint. I have a very light touch at this moment because I'm not looking to lift up any of the paint that's dry underneath. I'm looking to add a little more paint to those areas. I'm not looking to lift anything. You'll see when I put paint down on one side of a stem, I usually put that paint color on the other side so it runs through the background behind the object. So that pink, I just made sure there was a little on the top of the stem and a little on the bottom of the stem. I'm adding water and I'm going to just let it move and fade away. Just brightens the area. Adding a little bit of texture to the individual petals. Working again on 100% dry paper. The little bit of texture gives them a little movement also. Shows where the petal is bending a little more and where it might be laying a little flatter. I put those marks in, and then after a couple of seconds, I just use a little bit of clean water on a brush to soften them. I don't want them to look like really hard marks in there. That's just a little water softening them. A little more depth I'm adding right up against the center of the flower. Again, I want that connection, which would not be a very defined edge. It would be very jagged where those petals come in and come out of the center. A little more color in the middle. And I feel I'm done. And there's your final painting. I hope you really enjoyed this video. I had a great time making it, and I will see you in my next video.